Hey everybody, welcome. Oh, so great to see all you people. I'm so glad to see everybody here. This is a beautiful crowd, and there's other things going on in town tonight, I know, but you are in the right place. So give thanks. First, I really want to thank our sponsors. We have our co-sponsors. We have Our Revolution, Lane County. We have the Freedom from Aerial Herbicide Alliance, Go Team, trying to ban aerial herbicide spray in Lane County. We're not going away. Our community, Our Rights, that's the sister organization that says we have the right to ban aerial herbicide spraying. And then there's the Oregon Community Rights Network, and that's kind of our organizing, I don't want to call them overlord, but the umbrella organization that works with all of our community rights chapters. And then CELDEF, which is the big mama of the movement, that's where it all started. CELDEF, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, and they have helped to support our work here in Lane County, and also they're co-sponsoring this event. Yay. And I'm Michelle with Community Rights Lane County. This is your homegrown organization right here. We're looking, yay! So we're looking, of course, to grow and have more people be involved in our work. Please check out our table back there. We have really great books to read that will tell you about the community rights movement. Community Rights Lane County is part of an international rights of nature movement, and it includes Ecuador, Bolivia, Nepal, India, New Zealand, Sweden, England and Wales, Colombia, the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin, Mexico, the Ponca Nation of Oklahoma, Brazil, and the White Earth Band of the Chippewa Nation of Minnesota. Rights of nature is growing, and it used to be in the early days of our organization, which was 2012, we didn't really talk about rights of nature because we thought people weren't ready for it. And now it's really on the lips of many people. It's not a strange concept anymore. More and more people are feeling comfortable talking about rights of nature. And so we're building a movement that actually establishes legalized rights for nature so that an ecosystem would really have standing in a court of law. We believe that our Mother Earth and all her creatures need to be advocated for. And that's, if they can't speak, we have to speak for them. So this is the time, and you're in the right place. And we've invited Frank to speak here because he comes from a traditional ecological knowledge base, and we have a lot to learn. Community Rights Lane County understands that nature's rights must be legally recognized and protected by law. The perception of nature as property denies nature's inalienable right to exist, persist, and flourish. Since laws protect corporations to create environmental devastation, we work to recognize in law the right of nature to be healthy. Spain, Portugal, Greece, France, and Finland have expanded legal rights to recognize a human right to a healthy environment. But as climate change accelerates, we're finding that human right to a healthy environment can't be achieved without securing rights for the environment herself. So we ask this question as community rights activists: why do corporations have more power and privilege to create harm in our communities than we have to protect ourselves from those harms? And the reality is because they have been really savvy and they've made it legal. They are protected, they're legally protected. When you say, I don't want spraying to occur in my forest, the reality is that spraying is legal. So we consider that an unjust law, and we are challenging it with a just law, and that is to ban spray in our forests and move on. You know, we have to protect ourselves. And yes, this is civil disobedience. It's actually civil disobedience through lawmaking. And you know, we do this work because we care about our Mother Earth and we care about each other. So we need to think about the generations that are coming after us and what it is that we're responsible for. They deserve a future brighter than what the government is thinking we should leave them. So that's up to us. We don't live in a democracy, and if we want to live in a democracy, we have to create it. So that's us here. Frank Bibeau is a member of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, the Pillager Band, enrolled at White Earth and living on Leech Lake Reservation in Ball Club, Minnesota, with his sweet wife, Vicki, for more than 30 years. Yay. Lucky guy, for sure. Frank graduated from Bemidji State University with a bachelor's in political science and a law degree from William Mitchell in 2000. Frank has worked as a tribal attorney for Leech Lake Reservation, the Anishinaabe Legal Services, and private practice in a variety of tribal and state courts. He works extensively with Chippewa treaty rights, civil rights, and sovereignty on and off the reservation. Frank was recognized by Minnesota Lawyer in February 2015 for his legal work with treaty rights fishing case Operation Squarehook. In July of 2015, Frank was recognized by the National Legal Services Corporation for his extraordinary commitment to providing equal access to justice through pro bono work with Anishinaabe Legal Services. That's big. He currently works with Honor the Earth, a native-led nonprofit environmental protection group led by Winona, LaDuke, litigating to stop the proposed Sandpiper crude oil pipeline in Minnesota.
Line 3 now. Sandpiper, we killed Sandpiper. Line 3 now.
Oh, you killed Sandpiper? Yes. Well, okay. So now Frank's working on line 3. So they never go away, and neither do we. Frank is also executive director for the 1855 Treaty Authority, which is engaged in an exercise of off-reservation 1855 treaty rights to harvest wild rice at Hole in the Day Lake in August. And most recently, he waged the fight to secure the rights of wild rice for the white band of Ojibwe, the first rights of nature law to recognize the rights of a plant species. Huge. This is huge. So please, let's give Frank Bibeau a warm Eugene welcome.
So I'm here for rights of nature because that's what everybody else is really looking at, the global piece of this. I'm looking at a smaller piece for other reasons, and it'll become obvious along the way. I do a lot of treaty rights work. There's a lot of parallels, I think, to Oregon, but I don't know all of the tribes in Oregon or in Washington. When I was looking at the EPA Region 10 meeting that they had in Portland earlier this week, it said they have 271 tribes they're serving in Oregon, Washington, Alaska, and Idaho. We got basically 2 tribes in Minnesota, so it's a little easier in that regard. So I don't know the parts out here, but there's a lot of parallels, and you'll see that. And if there's questions along the way, that's okay. That's all good stuff. All right, so we'll start with, I put a couple pieces together last night just to try to focus on rights of nature at the same time. Climate change is really what we're all battling. We can call it a lot of other things, but climate change is really what it comes down to. And last Sunday on 60 Minutes, I was watching your lawyer here, Julia Olson, talking about the Juliana versus the United States case there. The thing that stuck out in my mind when she was talking was that she had been preparing for 8 years, and I thought, just 8. She's smart, she's quick. Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of thought, it takes a lot of preparation, and being a lawyer doesn't teach you those things, it helps you understand those things. Good or bad, I was also a bureaucrat for the state for about 15 years, but being a bureaucrat teaches you things about how the state looks at what it's doing. And one of the things that you learn, I was also a delinquent tax collector when I was going to law school, and it was just for unemployment tax, but what you learn when people want to appeal is you want to have your documents in the file folder. Because if you just appeal and you go to see what they got their stuff. So you got to fill the file. That's what the real job is, to have the counterbalance in those circumstances. And that's what I create. Okay, let's go to the next one. Toledo, Ohio.
Yes.
When we were battling Sandpiper and this started happening, this was the scariest thing for us in northern Minnesota, and the people in the Twin Cities, it just seemed to bounce right off of them. And we're like, the price of water has gone sky high in Toledo in 3 days. Does that not mean anything to you? And it's like, well, no, it's 500 miles away. So it's real easy to see what's meaningful and what's not meaningful. It didn't mean anything to anybody that I could see at the government level. And that's what's probably more alarming than anything else. And so you have to start thinking harder. All right. And this is another picture of it. It's just really amazing how much of an area of a Great Lake it can occupy. And I didn't study it very hard, but it's obvious that when this happens, you were without water for many purposes for a long period of time. For many purposes. I mean, it's just astounding. And I don't know that they've got a plan in place. I've never heard they got a plan in place. I mean, the only plan I've heard about is what's happened at the ballot box, and that's kind of tragic. Okay. And this one I saw too. This was troubling for me in some ways because I like fishing, but I was glad to see it. And what I was looking for when I was pulling this up was about the big oil, because big oil has been fully aware of what they've been doing for a long, long time. And so is the government. And so that's what it comes down to. And that's really who we're battling. It's unfortunate, but in some ways it's good because everybody is the people, and the government is this odd mechanism out there that even the people who work for government don't always like what's going on, and they'll call you and tell you stuff and help you out. So, okay. So Chippewa Treaty Rights, I use different terms. I don't know what works the best. Reserved rights are the rights that you don't bargain away, and people aren't always familiar with that concept, especially when it comes to Indians. They know it for themselves real well. So if you're selling your house and your car's in the driveway, you're not selling the car with your house. And so when we traded land away, it didn't mean we traded everything away, and that's what we have to remind people of, is that the deals aren't what people always think they are. My buddy Keith Sokola says those treaties are just bad receipts for broken promises. And that's about what they are. But the funny part is, if you know how they work, you can still collect on some of that stuff. But it takes time to figure it out because nobody teaches this. And for us, the Chippewa, we have 44 treaties with the United States. And so it's a lot more complicated. But that's in our favor sometimes too. It makes it harder for other people to follow up. Okay, so in the beginning, we started on the East Coast at the St. Lawrence Seaway, and basically we were guided through the Great Lakes to Minnesota and other places in the area where the wild rice grows on the water. So if I had my pointer, you'd see that long, treacherous going through of all those Great Lakes, and that was the journey that we took over a long period of time to get to what is now Wisconsin and Minnesota, a lot of Ontario and Canada. Technically, the Ojibwe were about 800 miles across and 1,000 miles north and south. And in northern Minnesota, we are called the Southern Ojibwe because so many Ojibwe are in Canada. So borders mislead your thinking a lot of times, and so you can't look at boundaries all the time for everything, but you need to know about them. Next. This is part of the migration story. I like this picture because it's a way of showing how we all traveled together and that we're all linked together. And that's really where everything starts. Okay, so the Louisiana Purchase, for those of you who remember that from school, that was like 1803, 1804. And so in reality, where we live up in northern Minnesota, and you can see where Lake Superior comes in and Lake Michigan, part of our territory was within the realm of the United States at the time, which wasn't exactly the United States at the time, and then part of it was still the French until they had purchased that territory. Where the very top of that curves, that's the Mississippi River, if you remember how the land deal went. And so they bought the west of the Mississippi from the French. The very top, that's the Mississippi River, this whole right edge. And at the top, you can see where it starts in northern Minnesota and comes across and down. And I'll talk about that again in a little bit, but I just wanted you to kind of see that on a continental basis. Okay. So in northern Minnesota, to me it's the top of the world for a number of reasons. It's hard to believe, but 3 of the 4 North American watersheds meet in Minnesota. There's actually a meeting stone put by some other people before Columbus. Up. I'm sorry. And so yeah. And so it's up on the Iron Range up there, and it's fun what you learn at times about what's going on. Hold on a second there. I was just going to say one other thing about that picture. Minnesota is also, because of this 3 watersheds, we also have 3 ecosystems of sorts. We have a deciduous trees, we have the coniferous trees, and then we have the open plains. And right now they're even talking about, with the climate change, that we could lose our pine trees or coniferous forest in the next 70 years. Right. So, it's kind of a crazy deal when they start using thoughts like that. Okay. So this is a birch bark canoe. This is made by some friends of mine, and not everybody that I knew put it together. This is in the Indian Museum in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And when I see birch bark canoes, I like to take pictures of them. It's really ingenious how they're put together, and it's really ingenious how they were copied very well for other people to use. Go ahead. And this is one that was given to my wife and I. This is an old birch bark canoe. The owner, she wasn't sure what to do with it anymore and just figured I'd find the right place for it. The piece that I like to show about this is it's made from one single piece of birch bark. So I don't know how old that tree was and when it was taken. Right. I've never seen another one like that. So it could be a 100-year-old canoe. I don't know. Yeah. All right. So when we had our first treaty, our first treaty about territory in Minnesota was in 1825, and they refer to it as the Prairie du Chien Treaty, and it established a boundary primarily between the Lakota to the south of the Red Line and with the Chippewa to the north. And so our territories run from Michigan all the way into North Dakota. Okay. And so in the 1826 treaty, we had a ratification session in essentially what's Duluth at the western end of Lake Superior. Because we were so spread out, we had to basically make sure more people had time to come and hear the same words. And so this treaty, even though it's ratifying the 25 treaty, it talks about that the grant is not to affect the title to the land nor the existing jurisdiction. Now, I've never seen the word jurisdiction in another treaty, but jurisdictions, and it's not an old Indian word either. And so the way treaty law works, in order to abrogate or remove rights from a treaty, Congress has to do it. And this is just a nuisance treaty. It's a ratification treaty. So they never even look back at this treaty. So we've got jurisdiction over a lot of things that people don't exactly understand what it is yet, because I haven't exactly mapped it all out myself. But we'll talk about it as we go, but you'll see that what people think are rights and what they have aren't always the same. So, okay. I try to avoid words. So Minnesota, this is all the little land cessions. It's not all of them, but many of the little land cessions that occurred over about a 20 or 30 year period primarily. And when you think about all these little pieces making up what is now the shape of Minnesota, you start looking at this nationwide and you start to wonder, how did you get states out of those shapes, So, but it's our spot is the big white spot in the middle of the 1855. You can see some little spots in between. I'll be talking about those because those are very interesting key spots that I'm using right now. Okay. So rights in Monoman. This is friends of mine. This is Todd and his father. Leonard, they're out at Hole in the Day. This was August of 2015. We were out essentially doing a protest by the highway on 371 in our large tourism area. And it scares people, it alarms people, and we have a little fun with it. But we were out protesting that day. We'll show some other pictures because we're trying to be peaceful also, We understand civil disobedience. We understand criminal conduct and going to jail, in a disproportionate fashion. So we have to be more careful about what we do. Next. So this is a little continuity, a series of pictures of kind of how things have moved along. This is a fairly common picture in the Historical Society and also in the National Archives of one person standing in the back and the other person sitting in the front knocking rice. That's how I see it most of the time, but there's every variation. Sometimes the knocker sits facing the polar, sometimes the polar's in the front, sometimes, you know, it's just what people are familiar with and how they like to go about it. So, but they're all out getting rice the same way. Go ahead. So this is what it would look like from the front of the canoe. You don't even really see the knocker's head, but the canoe is going through and the rice is being laid over. You can go to the next one. So you see where the knockers come in. You basically, you're laying over the grains with one stick, and then you can tap them while they're over the canoe, so most of the rice goes into the canoe. And I say most of the rice because the plant is designed so that it spreads rice when you're harvesting rice. So we actually are doing much more to help out by going out and harvesting. Okay, and that's kind of what rice looks like. You can see the different colors. There's usually about 100 to 120 kernels at the head of the staff. It's an aquatic grain, so it's like wheat with that kind of a head. I was reading one of the articles recently about rights of Monoman, and occasionally you learn things, and they said that wild rice is the only native grain to North America.
The only one.
Yeah. 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 Okay. So this was probably around 1950, I'm guessing. I was at the archives and taking different pictures. This would be a wigwam. You can see where you've got these giant sheets of birch bark, which are like big shingles or big plastic. And if you keep them stored right, you can just make your lean-to pretty darn quick, you know. And you can see where this, you know, this is like I said, probably around the 30s or 40s looking at the attire, but they're still out and they're still gathering because it's still part of our life and our culture. Okay, so this was a couple of years ago. It's not really much different. You know, we go out in canoes and go out in pairs and get to the shore. And so these were some folks at White Oak. I was buying their rice 2 years ago at this landing. It was 7 miles from home. It's always nice. So, okay. So again, these are some of those older pictures. So here you see where the rice that's been harvested has been laid out, and basically if you can use the sun and evaporation to dehydrate the grain, even 10-20%, you're going to save a lot on other work and firewood and things like that. Okay. And here she is again. She's finishing her rice in what we see as a wash tub nowadays. I've talked to people who've been in prison and things, and they teach finishing wild rice in barrels and different things. If you know what you're doing, you're just dehydrating things. But the real trick is to have it warm enough or hot enough and to keep it moving so it isn't burning. You know. Oh yeah, there's a fire underneath there. You bet. Yeah, so it's a real trick, and you have to listen to it. It's like popcorn when it's getting too hot. Sometimes you got to pull it right off the fire. I mean, you know, we have a more mechanized version now.
So you're drying it, not cooking it.
Right, just dehydrating it for storage. Okay, so this would be the same operation. Yeah, it's Tim in the middle there, and my buddy Ralph. I'm in the back, but you can't hardly see me standing there, but this is one of my first lessons with Tim's kettle. And his backyard was butted up against my grandfather's backyard, and that's where he learned a lot of his rice finishing and stuff. Okay, and this is a different way you can see the kettle. This is a really nice kettle, and you know, you get the heat going in there, and it holds the heat. It's probably a ½ inch thick, maybe more, and so it's a lot easier to work with. That tub that woman was working with, that's pretty thin. You can get hot pretty quick, and you know, there's some. I realize it can work, but I'm not that tricky yet. She looked like she had a lot of skill, so she's done it before. Okay, so going back to the 40s and things, you know, things started to change for us from how we were doing things naturally to where people were starting to figure out how to mechanize things. And this would be a thrasher. This would replace the person who would put the rice into a pit, maybe lined with a skin or a hide, and then would jig the rice so that it would collide against each other and wear the outside chaff off of the hull. And by putting it into this and just spinning it around, it essentially does the same kind of a thing. Much faster, less work. Okay.
You do that after you dehydrate it?
Yep, to get the papery part off. This would be that same thrasher on the right side. You can see where it's built to be closed up. And then in the back, you can see on the left side, that would be a fanning mill. And that's what you would do to try to get the dust off from the little holes that came up. There's always dust. There's always rice dust. And so you're trying to fan it as much as you can. And so what this does is, the way rice camps used to be, you'd be in a rice camp for 6 weeks, you know, in the old days. By doing it this way, I've seen pictures where they fly people in. They fly canoes in. They fly this equipment in, and they just fly out the finished rice. You know, I mean, that's how valuable this stuff used to be. Okay, it's kind of there still, but it's a little shaky. So this is Tim's backyard, and that red building to the right is the same red building that was there in that other picture that I was in, or whatever, it was a black and white. And I'm trying to work this out with Boys and Girls Club, because young people need to do this. I like the wild rice, I like the smoked fish, but I don't like to do the work. I just want the products, right? And so I know that I can find the right people. I haven't found them yet. It might be a young couple with a couple of kids or something like that. But the fish probably is more of an income because it's year round, where wild rice is just that one time of the year. Okay. And again, this is just kids' curiosity. When kids see how to make food, they're really intrigued about this. And fire and toys, you know, mechanics. I mean, it's all entertaining stuff in the big world. Okay. So this was put together for the Sandpiper, but it's still the same route. Normally, where that straight line comes across, it would go right down to where the red line ends at Duluth. And because the corridor is so thank you. Couldn't get that C word out. So congested, they want to drop down. This is what they wanted to do with Sandpiper when they were going to bring in the frack gas from North Dakota, but we were able to stop that. But we thought at the time it was a decoy path for Line 3 and for replacing other lines. So, and that's really what it is. So, but it's an interesting map to see how you can almost see where there's a line going through where the rice is gone. You know, and a line coming through. Now they want to go through our prime territory again. And they don't even know how to fix what they've done in some ways already. We've had a lot of problems in Minnesota. Right. Everything's disposable and you can move on. Problem is we can't. We are stuck. Right. Okay, next one. Okay, so this was that Operation Square Hook, and this helped me learn a few things or teach a few things both. The federal government, you know, they have a lot of money and a lot of things going on. They were trying what they call Operation Square Hook. Square hook being the squares on a net for gill netting fish. And people don't like us doing that, exercising our rights that way. And so these guys were also selling their fish because there are people who want to have a big fish on the wall that they never catch. But in a net, you can catch a lot of stuff. And people buy big fish. And so they had a 3-year, what they called a walleye poaching ring, because non-Indians who are capitalists are certain we're all in collusion working together. But we're all actually independents working against each other, trying to make the best deal without each other. And so they didn't understand what we call the trapper mentality. Where did you get that? I'm not telling you. You know, so it's really kind of an odd thing. And so what I learned also was, because of a case up in Washington State, the Shmishkin father and son, they were running cigarettes from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho into Yakima, and they got stopped by Washington State because they were selling their cigarettes without the state tax on it, the stamps. And in the Yakima Treaty of 1855, I think it's Article 3, they reserved the right to bring their goods to market on the public roadway. Those are words we would never think of in Minnesota because the roads were the rivers and everybody was using our transportation mode. So we didn't have to reserve a mode of transportation at the time. Now I would say we have a reserved right to bring our goods to market on the public roadway because they've dammed up our rivers and they've made it so we can't use them, and we have to use the roads out of necessity. So you learn from other cases from that. In that case, the Lacey Act is a 100-year-old case, and the federal government thought that they could get to us through our treaties, but our treaties aren't like the treaties out here. Our treaties were meant to be out getting beavers and harvesting a lot of animals and still being in the international marketplace at the time in the 20s and 30s and 40s of the 1800s. And when you get out here, the resources are a lot more scarce. You see where the people are using these long poles to get fish out of the rivers and stuff, you know, in the customary and usual places. Well, you know, those customary and usual places, they're a few miles apart from each other. You know, so it's really weird how that works out, but the treaties out here are the other language that they have. In fact, I'll tell you the story in a different way. If you lived in Washington as white people, you'd have treaty rights. How do you like that information? So in the Treaty of 1855, I think with the Puyallup and some other tribes, they refer to the extraordinary circumstances where the rights to fish are held in common with the citizens of the state, the citizens of the territory or the United States, because food and fish was that scarce that they wouldn't let the Indians have the sole right to some of these places. You know, so when you look at these treaties, you can start to figure out what the dynamics are, because they wanted us getting food for the railroads and the loggers in Minnesota. We were the grocery store. So they wanted us out doing commercial activities. Where here, you know, it was a whole different dynamic. Okay. So state civil jurisdiction. This is Public Law 280, and I wanted to show you guys this because there's a lot of similarities between Oregon and Minnesota. If you look at Minnesota, and this is on the civil side, not the criminal side. On the civil side, Minnesota, it's all Indian country inside the state except for Red Lake. Oregon, it's the same thing except for Warm Springs. So I understand what's going on out here with Public Law 280 already, because Warm Springs is going to be just like Red Lake. And Wisconsin, who's adjacent to us and where the pipelines go through, is going to be just like Minnesota. And California is going to be just like Oregon. So you've already got a partner adjacent to you through Public Law 280 through the Indians. Right. It's a whole different dynamic. So I don't even look at state law hardly ever, because state law doesn't help. It's meant to slow you down, distract you, and make you quit. You know? So this is important stuff. So this tells you where state jurisdiction was. It's not like that so much anymore, but it's still the right idea, and I wanted to share it. So this is Section A. There's 3 parts to Public Law 280, and that's from 1953. When we were still Indians, just like that guy and his family with the birch bark wigwam. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. We were just living like that. Okay, go to the next slide.
Why were there exceptions?
Because the Indians weren't going to accept this. We weren't going to accept them fully taking over our rights and telling us how things were going to be.
So why just the Warm Springs?
Oh, basically, and I'm going to guess on that because of Red Lake. When they passed this law, there were so many Indians living in Minnesota and Wisconsin, Chippewa, and same with the Indians out here, that the states were concerned about regulating Indian conduct, especially harvesting. And so they wanted to put us under state regulation. And what they did initially, and again, this comes back to research at the archives, but around 1940, there was a big conference out in Spokane, I believe, and they had a lot of the Indian tribes there, and it was the Bureau of Indian Affairs, essentially, and they were feeling them out to see if the regulations that they were harvesting under were similar enough to state, and if they would kind of accept it because of like rationing for World War II. And so we kind of got put under state regulatory authority during that time. And there's a letter from 1941 from the superintendent from our area in Cass Lake that says, it's just time we put these Indians under state regulation. It's simpler. You only got one set of rules, and we all know how it's going to work. It's the way we make it work instead of the Indians, you know. And so that's what they did. And if you look at time after that, you know, you got the Korean conflict, you got McCarthyism, you know, you got termination of Indians and everything else going on. And it isn't until about the 60s where we start figuring out what some of our rights are, and they start coming up with self-determination and things like that, self-governance. So we've been struggling through a lot of problems just to even be stable enough to work on our rights, you know.
But I'm still not understanding why just Warm Springs. I mean, we have Umatilla.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. No, you're right. And so what happened was they said that because we were, and I don't like to tell the story this way because people always used to go bad with it, but they referred to us as being lawless because we didn't have a legal system in place that they could see how it worked and what our laws were. And so they said that you also need a legal system to decide issues between Indians on reservation and things like that. And so that was like imposed on us in that sense, because they wanted us under their regulation one way or another. Minnesota thought they had us cold. They have had no idea that what they were given was about half of what they thought they got. And let me tell you, it's hard for them to give it up. It is hard. You know, one of the things that I figured out in law school that I tell people about, and it's bad and good, it's all in how you look at things, but with the concept of civil forfeiture, if you're familiar with that, you drink and drive too many times, they take your car, things like that. And so civil forfeiture, when you go to law school, it's what we refer to as a legal fiction, because it's really what it used to be the punishment for driving conduct, because it became considered excessive punishment under the Constitution. It's now a civil remedy for some people. And so what I figured out was, if you only have limited civil jurisdiction, then how are you taking cars from Indians on the reservation? And nobody could tell me the answer. They told me I was wrong. That they told me, but they couldn't tell me how. And so the first case I went to once I got out of law school, the judge said the legislature can't have it both ways. And so they had to give us the car back. And I started getting cars back, and I started figuring out that jurisdiction is really the key, because jurisdiction is the right to decide.
So what you're saying is that Red Lake and Warm Springs have their own jurisdiction within the state and within the
And a forum for dispute resolution.
They're kind of their own nation.
Well, we all were.
Yeah.
But they had a dispute resolution. They had the Court of Indian Claims at Red Lake, and I'm going to bet they had a Court of Indian Claims at Warm Springs. Even though it wasn't our structure, they recognized it as a legal dispute resolution structure. The one that they wanted us to adopt, of course. Yeah. Okay, so Part B says what the state doesn't get. They never read Part B. Part A is what they get, and that's all they ever read. And so it says that there's nothing to authorize the alienation, encumbrance, or taxation of real or personal property, including water rights. Now, in Minnesota, I never looked at that water rights very much because we got so much water and everything else. But when I started working with DAPL and KXL and the scarcity of water, and I kept reading what the states were doing to supposedly comply, and I kept thinking, this isn't what Public Law 280 says. And I pulled it out and I said, oh, the words including water rights are missing. The state was actually trying to get jurisdiction over our rights to trick the feds into letting them have jurisdiction, but it didn't work. And so it's really kind of a funny deal when I started realizing the authorization, they don't have any authorization, much less inconsistent with federal treaties, agreements, or statutes, or any regulation in place. And so they don't read this. The next one's even better. This is Part C. And this is really what goes back to 1953, when the Indians were willing to accept some of this imposition. There had to be a mechanism in place for us to establish our own rights and essentially preempt the states. That's what this does. And so this is what I've built the rights of Menomin from. This is a federal law. And it's supported by a federal law. Well, a state doesn't have any right to enforce or disobey a federal law. They don't even have any standing or jurisdiction in a federal situation. It cuts them right out of the picture.
They don't like it.
Right. So my job is to take away people's right to even tell me what they think. I mean, in a sense, that's what it is. It's like a Robin Hood, but a little different. So this is what I'm using, and I'll there's more to come. There was a professor, an adjunct at Mitchell Hamlin in Minnesota there, and I think her name was like Angelique Eaglewoman. And they were interviewing her about the rights of Menomin. It's just ancient law. They're just codifying it and putting it into words so other people could see it. And that's what's going to be the difference. We are using law that is so old and so basic that it flies right under the radar of all these, bells and whistles and fancy things.
Is that maritime law?
Well, no. But it would be a concept like that because it's so unique that if you don't fit the circumstances, you can't apply it, and if you're not familiar with it, you don't know how to defend yourself. And that's right. Right, so I'm one of the few who actually understands what's going on, and I'm the one who's making the decisions about how it's gonna go. You know, Enbridge doesn't even know what it's getting into yet. And they don't even have standing to argue this because the only people that have water rights would be the state and the feds and us. Right, it's gonna be hard for them to stand on the sideline. It's all interesting stuff. Go ahead, next one. So the Bill of Rights, Congress, no power. This is like kind of the first and the fourth. Freedom of speech, freedom of press, the right to be secure in your persons and house and papers and effects. I put these up here because of DAPL. One of my friends that I work with Honor the Earth, Tara Husko, was talking about when she was at DAPL. She said, I wish we would have had the Fourth Amendment rights to be secure in our dwellings because they treated them like they were nothing. And so I'll explain how I'm protecting that also here in a moment. Excuse me, go to the next one. Okay, so powers of, Dennis Banks, who just recently died. If you don't know Dennis was in AIM for a long time. Dennis is from Leech Lake, 20 miles over from where we are, Clyde Belcourt and Vernon already passed on. They're enrolled at White Earth. A lot of the people that you hear about with names, they're right from where we are. We're fighters. We've been fighters for a long time. Okay, so this was our Hole in the Day protest. You can see my wife there in the middle. Dennis is actually just above her. There's all kinds of people out there. And we're at a landing in Nisswa, Minnesota, where the name of the lake is Hole in the Day, which is after one of the chiefs who signed the 1855 treaty. And the city of Nisswa has this big sign that says you're not allowed to use the lake, can't harvest rice, can't put boats on it and everything. And the thing that they don't understand is the city has no rights whatsoever. And so I started letting them know that we're going to be coming down there for this protest, and I was emailing with like the city clerk, and I'm not getting any responses, and they're like afraid. And so I used to work for MnDOT too, and so I know that you could do anything by the road if you let them know ahead of time and you fill out a permit. So I filled out a permit that we were going to be beside the road, and they said, well, what kind of signage are you going to use? And I said, well, we'll have some orange signs out there to help people know to swing around. It doesn't matter what they say because all you need is an orange sign. I mean, it's not the same as what they want you to believe. All right. So this goes back to the original fighter. This is Hole in the Day, the second, Bug Nagizik. And Bug, he died around 1916, and that was when they finally did all the platting of Leech Lake Reservation, so it's probably the right time for him. But back in 1898, you don't hear about it, but it's what they refer to as the last great Indian battle in the United States, and it happened at Leech Lake. And it happened because people kept trying to take timber, even though we had made treaties and there were places they weren't supposed to cut. They weren't supposed to cut on the reservations and everything else. They were still doing that. And so Bug, he was a partying guy, and he'd get picked up once in a while, and because of bootlegging or knowing bootleggers, and Indians weren't supposed to have alcohol, and so they'd take him to Duluth. It's like 100 miles away, and they'd hold him there as a witness or wait for witnesses, and then nobody'd show, and they'd let him go, and he'd have a 100-mile walk back to Leech Lake. And so back in 1898, and I believe it was November, I think it was like the 4th or 5th, which is pretty darn cold, almost wintertime for us. And the cavalry came up because they wanted to get Bug, and they came up to the spot on the lake that isn't on the reservation. And they had like barges, with the cavalry, and there's like 100 of these guys. And one of the captains, they said he was just sour grapes because he wasn't hired. And he said, I told those guys, are you sure you got enough guys to go over there? Because they didn't know how many Indians there were. And so they floated across Leech Lake against the wind and everything else. Well, the runners were able to get over to Federal Dam before then. And so they knew, and everybody went down and hid out in the woods and all. And the soldiers came to the shore, I guess, and they thought they took over the camp, and supposedly they had their guns in little tripods, and one fell and went off. And when it went off, a lot of guns went off, and people got killed. And so there were 6 soldiers that died that day, and one of them was a Colonel Wilkinson, and we have a little spot on 371 called Wilkinson. People don't know why it's called Wilkinson, but it's for that colonel who died. And so Bug Nagizik, these soldiers had these new rifles after the Cuban War or something, and they didn't know how to use them. A bunch of them were new recruits. And so when you look at Bug, he has 2 necklaces of the empty brass cartridges from those rifle shells. And he would be in parades wearing all of this gear because he was a local folk hero. And folk hero. Now, when they had this battle of sorts, the very next day the chiefs went out to the local towns and to the local newspapers and said, look, we've asked you to stop. We've asked you over and over. And the towns thought it was on, man. They thought the Indians were coming out for real. And it was like, leave us alone. We've tried to talk to you. We've tried and tried and tried, and you just don't listen to the words, And we're still at that same point. So this is the same game for us. Okay. Now this is another thing about the press. You guys probably know who he is, Derek Jeter. So they were in Minnesota for the playoffs in, I think, 2014, and somebody hung a banner, which is fun for people who are younger than me. I took credit for as long as I could, but nobody believed me. But when that happened, we were not prepared for the web traffic that came, and we were overpowered. It's amazing how many people were watching baseball and didn't know what that banner meant and wanted to know. Yeah. You never know what's going to trigger people's brains and curiosity. Yeah. Okay. So, and this one I like to show. This one, I did the work because you can see me there protesting in Brainerd, but actually we didn't appeal the Sandpiper. A couple of the other groups did. But Brainerd's on the Mississippi. We came to protest, and so Brainerd remembered us.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So you never know. That picture was a year old, but they know who's in the fight. Okay. So right to travel, use, and occupy. Those words appear in a number of treaties. They didn't appear in our treaties, which made it kind of new for me when I started looking at the Sioux treaties from 1851 and 1868, because I've seen a lot of maps that refer to use and occupancy, but they were used to try to rip us off and say you weren't using this territory, so we shouldn't have to pay the full value for it, things like that. And so in the Lakota treaties, the Sioux treaties, they refer to the right to travel, use, and occupy. And actually it's the undisturbed right to travel, use, and occupy. Now, of course, they took some of that away from them. So this is, I don't know what lake this is on. This could be on Mille Lacs Lake, but how do you travel? That's how we traveled. Go ahead. Okay, so you're familiar with the rights to travel, and they go back a long, long time. Every creature on the planet of nature that isn't rooted travels. Who regulates that? Okay, next one. Okay, so this is the code I created. This is the second code that I created under Public Law 280C, the right to travel, use, and occupy traditional lands for water. And it's for spiritual places and cultural purposes. These are the magic words from the Indian Religious Freedoms Act. So we are practicing our religion by protecting the water and protecting the wild rice. Yeah. And we're telling the state that you can't interfere with our rights because that's what federal law says. And our laws aren't inconsistent. We just haven't criminalized the right to gather, the right for free speech. We haven't criminalized drumming or singing, like they did in the Dakotas, And so they've got a whole other thing coming. They don't have any idea. They've got these bases that they built up, to watch for us and get prepared and all. And one of my buddies who doesn't know it yet, Randy Goodwin, he's the executive director at White Earth now, but he was the head of public safety for White Earth for about 10 years. And before that, he was a highway patrol for Minnesota for 30 years. He knows everybody. So he's the guy I'm going to put in charge of making sure that everybody knows this. Right? He doesn't even know yet.
But he will.
He will. And he's going to smile about it. He loves what I'm doing. So it's real low-level stuff. All right, go to the next one. So I wanted to show you some other kinds of maps. I don't have my pointer, but all the maps that I've seen, because these are our maps with right to travel. These are Birch Scrolls. And so they all, as far as I know, I haven't seen anything different yet, they all end at Leech Lake. And so it's hard to tell me that Leech Lake isn't the center of the universe.
For water.
For everything. for everything, you know? So when you look at these maps, there was somebody up in, I think Calgary, that figured them out because they knew they were Ojibwe, but they didn't know what they really meant, and they realized after a while that they didn't really have anything to do with the Canadian Ojibwe. And then they were trying to figure out, because the lake always ends up goofy, because Leech Lake's a goofy looking lake anyway. And so they thought maybe it was Red Lake for a while, but then they realized that there weren't those kinds of rivers. And so then someone figured out that it was from Leech Lake, and then figured out that these go all the way out. So I'll explain the map as best as I can from sitting here. So when it comes out of Leech Lake, and that was right by Bear Island where Buganageezig lived, you see the first big river that comes down, that's actually the Mississippi River. And if you look at it, the Mississippi River has a line where it's not the primary river or route. It's coming into the primary river. We understood that Leech Lake was the big river. But white explorers who get paid to go out and find the source, that's too easy. Let's check the Mississippi. And so they went way back, way back. So as you come out, we live right by where the Mississippi and the Leech come together. And then there's two squiggly lines. And what the person said was that those were snakes and they represent false rivers. Well, the Ball Club River, where we live in Ball Club, is only a mile long, and it goes from the Ball Club Lake to the Mississippi, and depending upon how high the dam is, the water can flow either way, so it's not really a river to anywhere. And you go to Deer River and you look at the Deer River, it's on one side of the road, but man, it ain't on the other side of the road, is it? It just disappears into the brush, into the wetlands. And so they're false rivers. So then as you come around, the next place down on this map is actually the Sandy Lake, and there's a little line that comes down in a circle, and that's showing you that it's another lake, and then there's a line going up. And that would be the river going upstream and the river that goes into the Mississippi. Well, where that river stops going up, that's a portage. It's the Savannah Portage. And so you have to get out of there, and then you get into the St. Louis River. In the St. Louis River, you can see a couple of hoops, and I suspect that the first hoop is to go around some obstacles. The second hoop looks really dangerous, and you still go around.
Are you in the second segment here?
Yeah, kind of in the middle there where you see the little bumps, because you cross over from the Mississippi River to the St. Louis River. There you go. And so you can see as you come out, and if you're not familiar with Minnesota, it's not as obvious, but Park Point is that long point that comes down. And on a lot of Minnesota maps, you see this point, and it's on this map, and that's where Fond du Lac used to be. So as you come across the lake here in Michigan, and you can go that way if you want, or however, you can see where the Apostle Islands are, you can see where Copper Point is, and you can see where the lake narrows, and it goes in through Sault Ste. Marie, okay? And go to the next one.
Next slide.
Next slide. And you can start on the left again. So you can see where Leech Lake is drawn goofy again. Now go to the other one. Yep. So Leech Lake to the left. Yep. So it's goofy. And they're all goofy. There's nobody draws these things the same. And you don't need to, because that's the end. When you get there, somebody else will tell you where you need to go. You don't need to know that part. So you see it coming out, you see where the Mississippi comes in, but it's not the primary river. And you can see those other two false rivers, but they're not primary. You come around and you can see where the river goes into a lake, and that's the Sandy River that goes into Sandy Lake, and then you've got the Savannah River. You can see where that straight, that line is. That's because it's straight, that's a portage, okay? And it goes to the Savannah River flows into the St. Louis, and then the St. Louis River flows around. Now where that big loop is, that's telling you on that other straight line there's another portage, a shortcut, you know? You get out to Park Point, you can see where the Apostle Islands are, and as you work your way across, doesn't that look like Lake Michigan?
Yeah.
Yeah. Map goes all the way out to the Atlantic. It's probably 3 feet wide.
And it's
Right.
on Birch Bark.
It's on Birch Bark. Yeah. So maps aren't what we are given. You know, you try to figure out what's going on. Things are much simpler, but you can make them complicated. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, so these are some of the original reservations from the 1855 treaty, and that's that same white territory that I was talking about at the beginning. And so right at the southern end, you see Mille Lacs Lake and a little yellow and all. There's a red box. That's Gull Lake. That's where we were when we did the Hole in the Day protest. The next reservation up is Rabbit Lake. It's on the Mississippi River. The next reservation up is Sandy Lake. We were just talking about that and the connection all the way out to the Atlantic Ocean. Next reservation up is Pokegama, and that's at Grand Rapids. And then the next ones would be up at Winnebagosh and at Cass Lake. And those are all on the Mississippi River. And so we expected to always be able to use the entire river system. That was our expectation. Okay? So go to the next slide. So what I'm arguing is when they relocated us to Leech Lake and then relocated us to White Earth, the headwaters of the Mississippi is right adjacent to White Earth, and it goes through our other relocation reservations and all the way down. And so what I'm arguing is we have one large 250 or 300 mile Mississippi property right. It's a complicated thing, but it's a lot of little tiny pieces that people aren't aware of, you know. And I'm not too worried about it because it's all old stuff, so it's not like, you know, I have to hide it. But it's really slick how water rights, you can define your water rights. You know, you've got the federal laws and the state laws, but we have our own laws. So I can define whatever I want if I go about it within the boundaries. And I haven't done that one, yes.
What's the blue line?
That's the Mississippi River, joining all of those reservations. They referred to us in the treaties as the Chippewas of the Mississippi because we were in that drainage, in that watershed. And then the ones that were over to the east, those are the Chippewas of Lake Superior. Duh.
Does the Mississippi start then in
Yep, right there beside White Earth. Yep. And so because we haven't done anything to damage or pollute it, and we're at the top and everything else, we think we can claim that as well as anybody else. Right.
And so that, what I read said traditions heretofore or hereafter.
Right.
That's a pretty key word.
Right. Right. Think it up.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm good at that.
Right, me too. Me too. The trick is to keep it within boundaries that people go, well, I guess that's okay. They don't know what it means later. It's going to be a lot more meaningful later. All right, let's see what's next here. There's only a few slides left. So this is the slide that we used for the project. This was for Sandpiper, but they're the same route with Line 3. And what they did was when they realized what our rights were on reservation, they attempted to circumvent all the reservations by using this route because they thought that our rights were only enforceable on reservation because we're oppressed and we don't have time to figure out all this stuff. But Frank, he's got a little extra time, you know, he's motivated. And so I've found the information that shows that our rights are the same on reservation and off because the resources move. You got to be able to move with them, you know? All right, next one. Okay, so those are those young water protectors everybody's looking for. This picture, I'm not supposed to talk about the meeting, so I'll just be a little cryptic, but I would tell you that at this meeting, that's Joe Plummer and Winona and I. Joe's also an attorney and a Leech Lake member, and we were asked if we would come and meet with investors from the United States and Canada if they were willing to fly into Bemidji and meet with us too. Because they can get the party line from the oil companies anytime, but they wanted to know the real straight stuff. We told them stuff wasn't going to be working right. And Enbridge finally did come out and say that they're not even going to be able to start building to the second quarter of 2020 now. Right. Because of the water quality issues that we've got. Now the PCA is saying, well, it might take us a year to get through it. It's going to take you a little longer than that. Right. You know, so it's really a weird deal how all this works. I don't know if there's another picture after this or not. I don't think there is. Yeah. So laws work if you obviously can make your own law. Right? Now, we don't have that right typically as United States citizens or as state citizens. That's the real barrier. And a lot of what you heard earlier tonight and the things I was reading from Rights of Nature, the system is set up for capitalism. It's set up for corporations and things like that. It's hard to get around. Fortunately, we're like that third rail, and you can't exactly stop us. You know? And it's going to be really interesting, and it's going to help other people see. So this could be done here, but it can't, I don't think it can be done the same way with all the Indian tribes. It becomes more cumbersome. But there's probably some that are more adept into this. You're right near Klamath Falls and the Klamath Indians. Those folks, they have some good case law. I rely on their case law as much as the Yakima. So they've got some sharp people working some good issues out there they've been helping. Yeah. So, but it takes time, it's expensive, you know. Winona, she looks so young there. She's only 59. Joe and I turned 60 here a year ago, you know. But that's the three primary people probably in the fight right now. Yeah. That's what it comes down to.
So what about questions? Can we do?
Oh, sure.
And how do we handle that with all
You waive money. The one that's got the biggest bill, I point to.
How do we do that, Marshall, with the mic?
We better have trade.
Well,
We could just move it over here.
Oh yeah, you can come up here and face your peers and ask them.
Anybody got questions?
Go ahead, shout them out. I'll try to repeat them. Go ahead.
So Public Law 280A says that Oregon is all Indian country?
For the civil part,
That we.
well, you got criminal laws and civil laws, and basically the simple way of saying it would be you can't go out and kill someone, everybody goes to jail for that usually. Regulatory law would be like a stop sign and we're supposed to stop, but if you go through, you might get a ticket. If you're the ambulance, you turn on your lights, it's not even a violation of law. So it's regulated conduct versus criminal conduct. That's barring everybody, it's prohibited for everybody.
So I'm just wondering, we are having 5G cell antenna rolled out in the city.
What? Hold on. I don't know those acronyms. 5G?
It means 6 billion hertz to 100 billion hertz in millimeter waves. Okay, they're putting
It's the new phone
antennas-
system.
Okay. Okay.
cellular systems,
Mm-hmm.
and they're putting it throughout our city every 500 feet.
Wow.
Okay? I do not know if nature will survive it. So do those Douglas fir and cedar trees and rhododendrons that were originally here, do they have rights?
Rosebud is already doing rights with the air, and they're doing rights with signals, you know, radio and TV signals and things like that. They're setting up their regulatory system for that purpose.
So that would be a good place to look at case law then?
It would be a place to look at how they've set up a law to try to either assert their sovereignty or jurisdiction, either in parallel or in competition with the state or the federal government.
Is that contested in any way?
Not that I'm aware of, and those guys would like me to help them figure that part out.
So anyway, this is a major issue. I mean,
Yep. Yep.
3G and 4G, 2G causes frontal lobe damage in mice. It causes cancers of many organs. It causes lymphomas in female mice. It causes multiple issues with plants. And so now we're going to, like way over the top, human beings resonate about 120 hertz, and plants are not much different, okay? We're going to stick to 100 billion hertz.
Sure.
So just so you know, we have been approached by folks who are concerned about 5G, community rights in county, in terms of creating an initiative where the people could vote about this. It's a long-term route, but we have been approached, and you might want to talk to one of us about that.
I'm just thinking that the rights of the plants that were native to this area, if Oregon is under the jurisdiction under civil law,
Well, what I'm saying is that Oregon's civil jurisdiction may be suspect. That's a 1953 law, and the tribes can make laws that preempt certain activities that interfere with their rights to hunt, fish, and gather. So if there was a plant, you know, like they talked about the spotted owl 30, 40 years ago, if there was a plant that was that integral to the whole ecosystem that could be identified or something else based on what you're talking about, that would be the way to use rights of annulment. You know, I'm being approached by other Indian tribes who are trying to figure out what their key element is that's so unique that you can't say it's wrong. But you have to be able to show in your historical records and things like that. You know, you can't just bring it out and say, here it is. Rainbows are important to us, and if we don't have rain coming down, it ain't going to happen, you know.
Are you approached by non-Indian people to do that kind of thing?
Not so much, because they don't understand what our rights are. They're confused about what our rights are. After you're fighting pipelines with us for about 3 or 4 years, then they all kind of look at us and go, you know, we think you're our only hope. And I said, that's what I told you at the beginning. You know, and it's, well, we have treaty rights. You guys don't really have anything but that one right I told you about in Washington. You know? And that's just a fish in the same place. But you got a treaty right in Washington. Go ahead.
The First Nation in Canada, do they have better representation than the U.S.?
In a way, I would say yes, because they had a lot less rights and a lot less rights recognized and were being stepped on a lot more. And so somebody figured out how to get their same rights that we have up in Canada in the last decade. And that's not an easy process. So whatever gave way to that, some of it is exactly the people who are fighting that and making the arguments like I'm making. They're making unique arguments that change law. Go ahead.
When I was working for the Washington State Archives, kind of right in that place where the Patriot Act hadn't come into works and things were still a little analog compared to digital, and I was scanning the Yakima treaties and things, and just out of curiosity one time, went and did a little more research to see what was available on the internet. It was different than what was in the treaty. I'm just wondering how often, you know, because it's so hard to get an original document, but, you know, I have confidence that these documents often are, you know, added to, supplemented. Is it in getting to that simple language in that original document, it seems like you would have more of a bolstering for having more, or have you run into that much?
In Indian law, we are dealing with a lot of things that are 200 years old.
Yeah.
And what you have to do is you have to be able to integrate all of those concepts. And then you have to be able to understand when the courts are jerking you around and making up shit to try to get their way. You know? It's not easy to figure out, because these people who are judges and stuff are smart people. They've all been ahead of us. The documents all exist. It's just a question of where you find them. They could have been abrogated, but that would be by Congress, and it would be an act of Congress, and you would be able to find it. And speaking of that, and this is how powerful treaties used to be, and I'm hoping to get there again, in the 1854 and 1855 treaties with the Chippewa. In 1854 and 1855 are the years that most of the treaties were ever made in the United States across the country. So there are more 1854-55 treaties than any others. And so in a sense, you got the same people writing them, and you can kind of see where they are and how they're looking at different rights and all. And so in our treaties, because Buggo's a partying guy, they said alcohol was prohibited throughout the 1855 territory and in the 1854 territory. Well, around 1914, they figured out that the white people with saloons in Bemidji were selling liquor against the supreme law of the land. And they shut down all of the saloons in Bemidji and throughout the 1855 ceded territory. Now let me tell you, those non-Indians weren't happy about that, you know? So then you had Prohibition come along. Prohibition came along, and then you had the repeal of Prohibition, I think in 1933. They had to go and abrogate that part of our treaties after the repeal of Prohibition. They went and abrogated our, I believe it's the 7th article, and it says something to the effect that the 1855 and 1854 ceded territories are not considered Indian countries anymore for purposes of alcohol or something like that. And so what that tells you is that it's Indian country for every other purpose. Right. And that's what you start learning, is you start realizing what they're saying and what they're not saying, and when they're saying half of what they're talking about. And in that same decision, and it's from the Supreme Court, but it's in 1914, you know, it's 100 years old. It says that it's apparent that the Indians were anticipated to hunt and roam wherever they wanted to. They understood it then, but they've been trying to take those rights from us because they're economic, you know? And so in Minnesota, in the 54 territory, they pay the Indians there to not exercise their off-reservation commercial harvesting approximately $15 million every 2 years. And that's probably 5,000 Indians, Lake Superior bands. We're 20,000 Indians. And then you got the Red Lakers, it's another 10,000 Indians. That's 30,000 Indians who could be out commercial harvesting in territories where we're in dispute with our rights. And so the state is afraid that we will overwhelm their natural resource system that they sell licenses for to come on up to Minnesota and fish and catch a big one. So they don't want us out there getting anything. You get to the counties would like us to get that compensation because we're like an economic stimulus package with no ability to bank anything. And so we would go right into Bemidji and spend the money. We'd go right into Grand Rapids and Detroit Lakes. We'd spend every nickel we were given. And the counties know that. And they like that thought. And the state doesn't. So you get caught between governments, you know? And so some of them see exactly what we're doing and what we're protecting, and that they don't even have the ability themselves. And so I was going to say something about the people's thing here. Michelle made me think of something here. So Winona had a protest in Bemidji in August, and there were some people that came in from all over. You know, Tops of Sierra Club and different people came in to protest. And while it was all fun, they all got cited for disorderly conduct, which is a criminal charge. And most of those people were non-Indians, and there were a few Indians there who know what I do. They were trying to get me to defend their treaty rights to go out and protest, and I said, that's a secondary issue to getting your treaty rights understood and respected first. But when we went to court, the judge who was there, Judge Melby, he used to be a clerk for the judge that he replaced. And we won't go into that story, but it's a good one. But so he was up there, and they put all the cases on for Friday afternoon on November 2nd. I didn't really know, because I don't do that much criminal work anymore. And there were, I think, 27 or 30 people that were there. I was representing, I think, at least 17 of them, because that's what the judge said. He was surprised. And so when we go in, you know, they got security, they got metal detectors, and, you know, I noticed that they had a couple more dudes than they normally do, because, you know, you go into courthouses, you see how things work. And when we went into the courtroom, there was a couple extra bailiffs in there, you know, and nothing really got out of line, but the judge, you know, he's looking around in the courtroom, and he realizes that they're all people just like you guys sitting here, you know, not rabble-rousers in town. He's never seen them before. He's like, I don't know any of you guys. You've probably never been in trouble before. And it's like, he's stunned. There are people in the clergy sitting there, and he realizes that what they thought was this big, rowdy, you know, water protector, whatever, you know, terrorism, was just your neighbors. And that shocked him. And so as we're talking about things, I was trying to get a 6-month stay of adjudication for everybody, which means if you haven't had trouble, you only have 6 months of behaving yourself, and then it goes away like you were never convicted. And so that was the deal that I had negotiated for everybody. Not everybody wanted to take it, and that's fine. You know, I understand that part. The judge, partway through the case proceedings, he says, you know, he says, you guys are plugged in, you're ambitious. You guys could be out doing community service for each other and working off your fines that way. And so he made it so everybody could work off their fines without having to pay the county by working with the other groups that were in the same courtroom. And so one of the guys says, well, you know, I run the place. And he says, well, then go to some other place and have them sign off. Don't sign off on your own stuff. You know, and the judge said, you know, normally we don't have anything good happen in court. He says adoptions are it. And he was amazed, you know. So the legal system isn't prepared for what's coming. All they hear is what they see on TV and all the bad things, you know. So we're going to have fun with them. I mean, Winona's setting up camps. We've got properties in different places. You know, they're going to be camps for, you know, food and cultural stuff. They're going to be right on the pipeline, you know. They're going to have a tough time with us. But we've been preparing for a long time. So when that Julia talks about 8 years, I've been preparing for about 20. Now, I didn't know I was preparing for struggles like DAPL. You know, I didn't expect that. I mean, my wife and I, we grew up outside D.C. in the 60s. So we've seen this. But we haven't seen it like this, you know. So it's good stuff. You know, the other thing that's important, and I've got a couple of my younger cousins here, you know, one of the other problems for us in Indian country is the system has made it so that you have to like be enrolled to enjoy your rights. And that's not really was any understanding at the times of the treaties. When Flatmouth made the treaties, he expected that everybody would be able to go out and hunt, fish, and gather in the following generations. And so when my younger cousins aren't enrollable, the question is, do they still have the right? They were born Anishinaabe. They're born to have those same rights. They just don't have the blood quantum that the federal government has assigned under their roles to try to say this is only the people that can qualify. We have the right to say who that is. And so there's a lot of stuff coming that's going to change how this is, you know, but we have to have time because we get distracted by a lot of other problems with poverty and stuff.
Do you feel like the courts are more receptive now to tribal law than they have been in the past?
They are in Minnesota. Corey Wawasik came up to Leech Lake. She was working with me for a while when I was at the legal department, and then she became a judge, very experienced person. And she's now become a judge in Itasca County there in Grand Rapids. And so they have, I'll call them co-sessions on some of the diversion programs for youth. Down in Ramsey County, or Hennepin County, which is our largest county and largest Indian population, when I used to do CHIPS cases for out-of-home placements and things, Hennepin County would let White Earth come down and hold court down there because the tribal members didn't trust the city courts or the state courts. And we just wanted to get the kids to the right place and get the parents rehabilitated. You know, it doesn't matter who's making those other decisions. And so they figured that out right away because they had such a caseload they couldn't keep up with. It's always when you got too much going on, you can't handle it, you're willing to take some help. But until then, you think you're in control of everything. You know, and that's how it works. You know, so it's a necessity. So when I come into these courtrooms, and I don't go in so much anymore, but when those judges see me, they know there's something wrong on their docket. That's what they know. They don't know what it is yet. And you'll see the bailiff, he'll start looking down and it's like, wonder which case it is. You know, it's funny because I don't come in for anything else like anybody else does. And usually when I'm done, there'll be 5 or 6 young Indians there and they'll say, man, I gotta talk to you, man, I got the same problem. And you don't even know what the same problem is. And it's because we're living in a world of racism and oppression. And so I was in court one time and this young guy stopped me on the way out. And he was telling me he had the same problem, you know. And I said, well, so what's your problem? And he says, I've got a ticket here for not a drop. And I said, well, what's that? And he says, well, that's where you can't have a drop of alcohol under 21 or they take your driver's license away until you're 21, which I'd never heard of because I was never 21 in Minnesota. And they didn't have that law then. And so I said, well, how'd they catch you doing that? And he said, well, they pulled me over. And I said, so you were driving? And he said, yeah. And I said, so do you have a driver's license? He said, no. I said, they give you a ticket for that? He says, no. And I said, did you have license plates? He said, yeah, but they were expired. And I said, so your registration expired too? I said, they gave you a ticket for that? He said, no. There were 4 things I didn't give him a ticket for because we have the code and the law for those tickets to come to our tribal court. Those police would have to show up at our tribal court and testify. And they don't want to waste their time. They wrote them up for the one thing they think they have jurisdiction for, the alcohol. And that's what they sent them there for. There was a county attorney at White Earth Reservation in Monoman County. Boy, you never know who people are, I guess, growing up. And I didn't know her, but she was the daughter of the grocery store owner in the small town, and so she was special. She went to law school. And when I started coming over there on civil forfeiture issues and other things, and she started to understand that there was a lack of jurisdiction by them, she would not send those tickets to tribal court. She wouldn't spend the money for the stamps, for the envelopes, for her staff time to send those tickets to tribal court that involved Indians. And every one of those sheriff's deputies, they made sure those tickets got over there because they're worried about public safety. This is how twisted your legal system is. This is your legal system, it's not mine. It's the one that we have to engage in and figure out how to protect ourselves. And it's not even sane, you know? And so it's hard until you really invest yourself into these kinds of things. So yeah, I work with Anishinaabe Legal Services, it's poor people. Same thing with public defenders. If you don't understand what's happening to the poor people who can't even have time to complain to really what's happening, how they're being fleeced, then you're not even aware of what the real problems are in the world. Because everybody who's got money is just happy-go-lucky. You know, for the most part.
So the reason
the reason we brought you here, we're non-Indians. We're working within the courts of Lane County, who get it wrong every time when it comes to us. They get it wrong. It's not that we're messing up, our courts are getting it wrong. But we brought you here because you're feisty. You know, you inspire us. It's not easy to get rights for the, where you are. That wasn't easy, even though you have a different court system and different tribal treaties to work with. But you persevere, and I mean, that's what we have to do. That's our job. We're inspired by you, and we won't go away until justice is done.